The ceremonial blade stopped an inch from Marcus Chen's throat. "You dare present this?" High Counselor Vethras's voice echoed through the obsidian hall, her forearms rigid with barely contained fury. "A human? For the Empress's consideration?" Marcus kept his eyes forward, fixed on the empty throne at the far end of the chamber. 37 Kaelith nobles surrounded him in a crescent of judgment, tall, elegant beings with skin like polished silver, and eyes that burned amber in the dim light. Each one radiated the same disgust he'd grown accustomed to in his 3 years among the stars. "The Trade Guild selected him," Ambassador Yates said from somewhere behind Marcus. "Earth's contribution to the Unity Accord. A cultural liaison as stipulated. The Accord specified a representative of worth." Vethras withdrew the blade slowly, deliberately. "Humans have been spacefaring for barely a century. You have no great houses, no lineage, no honor debt to speak of. What worth does this male possess?" Marcus could have answered. He could have listed his degrees, his years of xenocultural study, his fluency in 17 alien languages, including their own. But he'd learned that among the Kaelith, self-advocacy was considered vulgar, the domain of those too weak to have others speak for them. And he had no one to speak for him. Perhaps a new voice cut through the tension. "The question itself reveals more about us than about him." The hall fell silent. Nobles who had been shifting with impatient disdain suddenly went rigid, their amber eyes dimming to a respectful bronze. Marcus tracked their gazes upward to the gallery that ringed the chamber's upper level. She stood at the railing like a statue carved from moonlight, taller than the others, her silver skin bearing the faint luminescent patterns that marked royal blood. 4 arms rested at her sides with practiced stillness. But something in the set of her shoulders spoke of weariness rather than authority. Empress Sethira Val Kaelith, ruler of 17 systems. Widowed 3 years ago when her bonded mate fell in the Periphery Wars. And according to every intelligence briefing Marcus had studied, utterly alone. "Your Radiance," Vethras began, her tone shifting to careful deference. "This is hardly a matter requiring your... A representative has been brought before my throne. That makes it precisely a matter for my attention." The Empress descended the curved stairs with fluid grace, her ceremonial robes trailing like liquid shadow. "You questioned his worth, High Counselor. By what measure?" Vethras hesitated. "He is... 8. Human, Radiance. I observed as much." Sethira stopped 3 paces from Marcus, and for the first time he allowed himself to meet her eyes. They were not amber like the others. They burned a deep violet, shot through with threads of silver. Beautiful, he thought, and infinitely tired. "Do humans speak or must others speak for them?" "We speak," Marcus said quietly. "When speaking serves purpose." A ripple of shock moved through the assembled nobles. To address the Empress directly, without invitation, without the proper honorifics, purpose. Sethira tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "And what purpose do you see in this moment?" "Honestly? I'm trying to determine whether this is a genuine question or a test I've already failed." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus could feel Ambassador Yates's horror radiating from behind him, could sense the ceremonial guards shifting their grips on their weapons. But the Empress's expression didn't harden. If anything, something flickered in those violet eyes, surprise perhaps, or the ghost of amusement long forgotten. "Both," she said finally. "It was both." She turned to Vethras. "The human stays. House him in the eastern wing, the quarters overlooking the memorial gardens. Radiance, those chambers are reserved for... I am aware of what they are reserved for." Sethira's voice carried no anger, only a flatness that somehow cut deeper. "The human stays. This audience is concluded." She departed without another glance at Marcus, ascending the stairs with the same measured grace. But he noticed what the others seemed to miss, the way her lower left hand trembled slightly against the railing, the brief pause at the gallery door where she stood just a moment too long, before disappearing into shadow. The nobles filed out in rigid silence, leaving Marcus alone with Ambassador Yates. "What the hell was that?" Yates hissed. "Direct address? Without honorifics? Chen, I specifically briefed you on..." She wasn't testing my knowledge of protocol. Marcus watched the empty gallery where the Empress had stood. She was testing whether I'd lied to her. "And how could you possibly know that?" Marcus thought of the tremor in her hand. The weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. The way she'd looked at him, not with the contempt he'd expected, but with something closer to desperate curiosity. "I recognized the look," he said simply. "My wife had it too, in the end." Yates opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. In 3 years of working together, Marcus had never mentioned Sarah. Never explained why a promising xenocultural researcher had abandoned his career on Earth to take postings in the most remote, most dangerous corners of known space. Some wounds weren't meant for explaining. The memorial gardens were exactly what the name suggested. Marcus stood at the window of his appointed quarters, watching the twilight transform the space below. Crystalline monuments rose from beds of bioluminescent floor, each one marking a Kaelith who had fallen in service to the Empire. Thousands of them arranged in patterns he was only beginning to understand. And at the center, larger than all the rest, a single obelisk of black stone. Prince Consort Valen Val Sethira, he murmured, reading the inscription he'd memorized from the cultural database. Fallen at Meridian Station. 3rd year of the Empress's reign. You read our script. Marcus didn't startle. He'd heard the subtle shift of the door, felt the change in air pressure that marked a Kaelith's entrance. What surprised him was that it was her, Empress Sethira, standing in his doorway without escort or ceremony. I studied it, he said, turning to face her. Before I came. Why? Because communication requires more than translation. It requires understanding the shape of thought that creates language. Sethira stepped into the room, her robes exchanged for simpler garments that still probably cost more than his annual salary. Without the ceremonial layers, she seemed somehow smaller. More real. The counselors believe I housed you here as an insult, she said. Placing a human where he must look upon our honored dead each day reminded of his own people's insignificance. And did you? No. She moved to the window beside him, maintaining careful distance. I housed you here because these are the only quarters from which another person cannot be observed. The gardens are monitored, but the rooms themselves. She paused. They were built for privacy, for grief. Marcus absorbed this. You're giving me the only place in your palace where I won't be watched. I am giving you the choice of whether to be watched. The distinction matters. Her violet eyes fixed on the black obelisk below. You spoke of purpose. In my experience, humans who come to our space seek advancement, profit, or escape. Which are you? Escape, Marcus admitted. Though not from anything here. From what then? He could deflect. Should deflect, probably. But something in her directness demanded honesty in return. From the person I was becoming. After my wife died. Sethira went very still. Among the Kaelith, death was rarely spoken of directly. It was considered a private matter, shrouded in ritual and euphemism. You speak of it plainly, she said finally. Death doesn't become less real by avoiding its name. No, don't you. Her voice dropped. It does not. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the monuments glow in the gathering dark. Marcus was acutely aware of her presence, the faint scent of something floral and electric, the way the light played across the patterns on her skin. My counselors fear you, she said eventually. Not because you are human. Because you do not behave as humans have before. How have humans behaved? With calculated deference. Performing respect while their eyes calculate advantage. She turned to study his face with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable if it weren't so clinical. You perform nothing. You speak as though speaking to an equal. Should I not? You should not. A hint of something that might have been dark humor crossed her features. And yet I find I do not wish you to stop. Marcus smiled, just slightly, just at the corners. Then I won't. You are strange, Marcus Chen, I've been told. She moved toward the door, then paused at the threshold. Tomorrow the council will present petitions. You will attend. Observe how our people interact, how power flows in this court. After, you will tell me what you see. You want my analysis. I want an honest perspective. It is in short supply. She met his eyes one final time. I have been Empress for 12 years. Widowed for 3. In that time, I have been flattered, manipulated, feared, and obeyed. But I have not been seen. She paused. Do not make me regret believing that you might be different. She left without waiting for a response. Marcus turned back to the window, to the black obelisk standing sentinel over the dead. Somewhere in this palace, an empress who commanded 17 systems was walking alone through empty corridors, returning to chambers that had been built for 2. He understood that loneliness. Had lived inside it for 2 years after Sarah's diagnosis, and 3 more after her death. The difference was that he had chosen solitude. Sethira had it thrust upon her. Tomorrow he would do as she asked. He would observe, analyze, report. It was what he was trained for, what he was good at. But tonight, for the first time since leaving Earth, Marcus Chen felt something other than the dull ache of grief. He felt purpose. The petition hall erupted into chaos when Marcus stepped between the assassin and the Empress. It happened fast. 3 weeks of quiet observation shattered in seconds. The petitioner who approached the throne was no merchant seeking trade rights. The data slate he carried was no contract. Marcus recognized the chemical signature a fraction before anyone else, remembered the training he tried to forget from his years in Earth's diplomatic security corps. He moved without thinking. The blast caught him in the left shoulder, spinning him backward into Sethira's arms. Pain lanced through his body, white-hot, immediate, absolute. The hall filled with screaming, with the crash of ceremonial guards finally reacting, with the wet sound of the assassin being subdued. But all Marcus could focus on was the Empress's face above him, violet eyes wide with something he couldn't name. You... Her voice cracked. Why did you... Seemed important, he managed. You still have 17 systems to run, you fool. You absolute. Her hands pressed against his wound, silver skin staining with human red. Medical staff. Now! The world began to blur at the edges. Marcus was distantly aware of being lifted, of voices shouting in Kaelith too fast for his pain-addled brain to translate. But one thing remained clear. Sethira's hand gripping his, refusing to let go even as they rushed him toward the medical wing. "Why?" she demanded again, her voice raw in a way he'd never heard. "You are nothing here. A liaison. A visitor. Why would you?" "Because you're a person," he said simply, "and people shouldn't die alone on their own throne." Her grip tightened until it hurt. But she said nothing more. He woke 3 days later to find her sitting beside his bed. The medical wing was empty except for them, a fact that spoke to the extraordinary breach of protocol her presence represented. Empresses did not visit the bedsides of injured liaisons. They sent physicians, perhaps. Official commendations, certainly. But they did not sit in uncomfortable chairs through the night watches, dark circles beneath their eyes. "You've been here a while," Marcus observed, his voice rough. "The physicians indicated you might not survive the first night." Sethira's tone was carefully neutral, but her hands, folded in her lap, trembled slightly. It seemed prudent to remain nearby. For diplomatic reasons. Yes. She met his eyes, purely diplomatic. Marcus smiled despite the pain. Liar. Something cracked in her expression, a fracture in the mask she wore so carefully. 3 weeks. You have been in my court 3 weeks. In that time you have defied every expectation, challenged every assumption, and now, she gestured at his bandaged shoulder. Now you have taken a weapon meant for me. Why? I told you why. You told me I was a person. As though that explains anything. Doesn't it? Sethira stood abruptly, moving to the window with her back to him. Her shoulders rose and fell with breaths that seemed too carefully controlled. Among my people, she said quietly, the bonding of mates is not merely political. It is a merging of spirits. When Valen died, I felt it. The severing. As though half of my soul had been torn away. She turned to face him. Since then, I have been incomplete. A hollow throne. A symbol without substance. I know, Marcus said. I recognized it. How? Because I've been incomplete too. Since Sarah. He pushed himself upright despite his body's protests. Grief like that doesn't make you less. It makes you more real. More present. Everyone else moves through life at the surface. People like us, we've touched the bottom. We know how deep it goes. Sethira's control finally shattered. Not dramatically, she didn't weep or cry out. But her expression crumpled into something raw, something true, and she crossed the room in 3 quick strides. She asked me once, she whispered, sinking into the chair beside his bed, close enough that he could see the tears he refused to let fall. My mother, before she passed. She asked why I wasn't afraid of being alone. I told her I had Valen. That I would never be alone. And now I have 17 systems and a palace full of people who need me to be unbreakable. Her voice caught. But I am so tired of being unbreakable, Marcus. I am so tired of being seen as a symbol rather than a soul. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her skin was cool against his, smooth and strange and perfect. I see you, he said quietly. Not the Empress, not the symbol. You. She looked at their joined hands as though she'd never seen anything so remarkable. The Council will never accept this. A human, in the Empress's confidence. It violates 1,000 years of tradition. Probably. My enemies will use it against me. Against you. Almost certainly. You could die. You nearly did. Yes. He squeezed her hand gently. But I didn't come here looking to survive, Sethira. I came here looking for a reason to. She laughed. Broken, wet, real. You are impossible. I've been told. When she leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his, he felt something shift in his chest. Not the spark of instant passion that stories promised, but something deeper. Quieter. The recognition of 2 broken things finding edges that fit together. Stay, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. 6 months later, Marcus stood before the Council of Houses. He wore Kaelith formal attire now. Dark fabric that shifted color with each movement. A rank insignia at his collar that had required 3 separate votes to approve. The councillors who had once looked at him with contempt now regarded him with something more complex. Respect, perhaps, though not without resentment. The human has served adequately, Vethras admitted, the words clearly costing her. His insights into the periphery negotiations proved valuable. Adequate. Marcus smiled slightly. High praise, High Counselor. Do not presume too much, liaison. I never do. From her place on the throne, Sethira watched the exchange with carefully masked amusement. But Marcus saw the warmth in her violet eyes, the private acknowledgement that passed between them in shared glances and subtle gestures. They had not made their relationship public. The political complications were still too volatile, the cultural barriers too significant. But in the quiet hours when the palace slept and the gardens glowed with memorial light, they found each other. Slowly, carefully, 2 wounded souls learning to trust again. The matter at hand, Sethira said, returning the council to order, is the proposed alliance with the Terran Confederation. Ambassador Chen has been instrumental in drafting terms acceptable to both parties. I move that we proceed to formal negotiations. The vote was not unanimous, but it passed. Marcus caught Yates's eye across the chamber. His old colleague looked simultaneously proud and slightly betrayed, probably wondering how his assigned liaison had ended up as the Empress's most trusted advisor. Some things were hard to explain. Later, in the gardens, Sethira found him at his usual spot, the bench facing Valen's memorial. You come here often, she observed, settling beside him. It felt wrong to avoid it. He was important to you. That makes him important to me. She was silent for a long moment, studying the black obelisk. I have been thinking about something you said. The day you woke in the medical wing. I said a lot of things. The painkillers were quite strong. You said you didn't come here looking to survive. You came looking for a reason to. Marcus nodded slowly. I remember. Have you found one? He turned to face her fully, taking in the moonlight on her silver skin, the patterns that glowed faintly with emotion, the violet eyes that no longer held weariness but something closer to hope. I found something better, he said. I found someone worth building a new life alongside. Someone who sees me as clearly as I see them. Sethira's expression softened in a way that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Marcus, you asked me once why I wasn't afraid of you, why I spoke to you as an equal when everyone else performed deference. He reached up, touching her face gently, a gesture she leaned into without hesitation. The answer was simple. Titles, power, species, none of it mattered. When I looked at you, I saw a person. Someone lonely. Someone strong. Someone who deserved to be known, not just obeyed. And now? What do you see now? He smiled. The real one. The one that didn't come easily anymore but felt right when it appeared. Now I see the same person. Just happier. And that's enough for me. That's more than enough. She kissed him then, soft and certain, without the hesitation that had marked their early days. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright. The council will adapt, she said. They always do. And your people, my people, have spent 1,000 years believing strength means standing alone. Perhaps it's time they learned that true strength is finding someone worth standing beside. She took his hand, intertwining their fingers. You've taught me that, Marcus Chen. You, with your impossible honesty and your refusal to be afraid. I was afraid, he admitted. I'm still afraid sometimes. But not of you. Never of you. Of what, then? He looked at the memorial garden. At the monuments to the fallen. At the new growth pushing up between ancient stones, and felt something ease in his chest. The grief would never leave entirely. Sarah would always be part of him, just as Valen would always be part of Sethira. But grief shared was grief halved, and love found in broken places was love that knew its own worth. I was afraid of never feeling whole again, he said quietly. Of spending the rest of my life as half a person, going through motions that meant nothing. And now? Marcus squeezed her hand, watching the memorial lights paint patterns across her skin. Now I think wholeness isn't about filling what's missing. It's about finding someone who makes the missing pieces matter less. He met her eyes. You make them matter less, Sethira. Every day. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. A gesture of vulnerability that an empress should never show. That a widow should never offer. That a lonely woman had finally found the courage to risk. Stay, she whispered again, as she had in the medical wing. But this time it wasn't a plea. It was a promise. Always, Marcus answered. And in the Garden of the Dead, surrounded by the light of fallen heroes, 2 broken souls began to heal. Together.